Welcome. Have a seat. Whatever's going on, you can tell me. That's what I'm here for. You're relatively new to the company.
I mean, I've been working here for nearly 2 months.
And you're under a lot of stress. Entry-level jobs in this industry are tough, right? Long hours? First one in, last one out.
Good night.
You're smart. You have to be smart. It's a tough job, but I can see that you've got what it takes.
I want those new pages before I get on the plane.
He promised them first thing.
Where are we at?
200K in 2 points.
That's bull.
Maybe you can put in a good word for you.
No, he'll hire externally. Listen, his schedule has shifted to 7 p.m. work.
Still at the hotel, or?
Yes. What?
This is turkey. I said chicken.
There's a girl waiting.
Oh, her. She's been here before. A few times.
What is it?
The wife. Say he's in an important meeting.
No, say he's in screening.
Where is he?
What did you say to them? What did you say? They told me you were smart.
I overreacted.
It was not my place to question your decision. I will not let you down again.
You know you can always come to us, right? Come to us first, okay?
The last 2 checks don't have a name or anything, just the dollar amount.
Ignore it.
Okay, and will he know what it's for?
Yep, he'll know.
I wouldn't sit there.
Never sit on the couch. Here and here, initial here, sign there.
Do I need a lawyer or something?
Do you have a lawyer?
What happened? Where'd you go?
I was worried for this girl. I mean, they were just like laughing about it.
Can you deal with this?
Hi, why me? Who was that?
That? Wasting my time.
Your mom and I were excited for you. It's a great opportunity.
What can we do?
Do about what?
Hello and welcome to this BFI at Home event. My name is Simran Hans. I'm a film critic for The Observer, and I'm very happy to be joined by the filmmaker Kitty Green, all the way from Australia. Hi, Kitty.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about her brilliant film, The Assistant, which I guess I would describe as a movie about power and gender, sort of set in the day of a life of an assistant to a Hollywood executive. But maybe you have a different way of describing it, Kitty. I don't know.
No, that sounds pretty close to what I say, which is sort of like the youngest woman on the desk of a predatory film executive is my synopsis that I generally use. But yeah, you're right about the themes, etc. It's great.
Well, I think when you say predatory film executive, one person comes to mind. And obviously, you know, that person is Harvey Weinstein. But the movie is not about Weinstein specifically. And actually, the sort of predatory figure that looms large over the film, we never hear his name, we never see his face, we just hear his voice. And I wonder if, you know, maybe we could start by talking a little bit about sort of the shadow of Weinstein and how this film kind of started to come about. And I also, I guess, like how the timeline of you making it coincided with all of the Weinstein stuff in the New York Times and in the New Yorker, because from what I read about this film, it began as a sort of expose of power and sexism in college campuses, right?
Yeah, it started before kind of the rise of the Me Too movement. Essentially, I started doing I was interested in talking about misconduct and gendered environments, essentially, and I started by doing almost like a research tour around around colleges in the United States. So I went to a bunch of colleges and I were chatting to students about these issues, because at the time, that's where those conversations were happening. Like if you wanted to talk about misconduct, I mean, students were talking about that at the time, and everyone else was sort of a little quiet. So it was funny when this was right, I think it was the same year that the Weinstein story broke. So it was right before. And then I was on one of those campuses when the Weinstein story broke, and it was in my phone and kind of blew up. All my friends were texting me about it, and I had a few friends that worked there for him, and I had a few friends that worked for other men who have similar patterns of behavior. So I kind of shifted focus at that point to talking about the film industry, because it was something that I obviously was close to as I worked in it. So it just was more familiar to me, I guess, than the colleges, but was still the same kind of themes that I was looking to explore. So it shifted at that point. And I started interviewing women, some of whom who worked for Miramax, and then I kind of branched out to other companies and studios and agencies, and then women in finance and tech. I was speaking to all sorts of women who were in entry-level positions about what it's like in their companies, is there a role for them? How do they see themselves kind of climbing the ladder? So a lot of them felt like there was no path for them forward. So it was kind of like, what is getting in the way of you getting into a position of power were kind of what I was most interested in. And so microaggressions and sexual harassment and gendered division of labor, like all these subjects were really interesting.
I want to kind of think a little bit about this idea of the entry-level job and the way that this film looks at the structures of power from the bottom rather than from the top. Can you remember your first entry-level job in film, or sort of entry-level job as a young woman?
Yeah, I mean, I was an assistant at like a post-production facility for a bunch of editors. So I had my time being an assistant and feeling uncomfortable even opening my mouth and suggesting anything, because I knew that people would often not want to hear my opinion, and just like the kind of awkwardness of that time. But yeah, so I had something like that. It wasn't it wasn't as toxic as the kind of environment depicted in the movie. But I mean, I don't know, a lot of women, I mean, I've had experiences like a lot of the bits and pieces in the film, because it is so, I mean, the film industry is inherently sexist, I think. And like, there is a lot of kind of misogynist kind of comments and behavior. And so, yeah, it's not that far from my experience, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just think that those entry-level jobs in any kind of industry are so gendered, and I think it's really smart how this film shows all of the sort of mundane gendered labor that women are expected to do. I mean, the main character, who I don't think her name is ever said in the film either. She's kind of a sort of nameless cipher who drifts through the movie, but the assistant, as I'll call her, played by Julia Garner, she has to do all sorts of things that are totally like beneath her pay grade. She's got to babysit children, she's got to clean up after the men, she's got to go and fetch the lunch, and it's all these kind of domestic things that she's expected to do, which I think is really interesting, given that she's in a professional environment and she's constantly told that if you want to succeed as a producer, which is what she admits her ambition is, she's got to do all of these weird sort of domestic female tasks. One of the movies that this film made me think of was obviously Chantal Akerman's Jeanne Dielman. In the kind of way you show the detail and the drudgery of women's work, but also in the kind of fixed point of view and the kind of locked in shots and the way you use duration. What made you kind of think that you'd want to set this film over the course of a single day?
Yeah, well, definitely Jeanne Dielman was a big influence on the film, and its sort of temporality and focus on gesture and rhythm and routine. But I guess with this one, it kind of came about in a different way, in that I was sort of told a friend of mine, I remember being at dinner or something, and I said to a friend, I'm making a film about an assistant that works for a predator, essentially. And he said immediately, oh, the enablers, in this way that made it sound so evil, or like as if she's so like insidious. And I was trying to explain how complex the position is, that she's got absolutely no power and she's in this giant machine that's set up around this predator. So it was kind of about trying to give the audience an experience of being in her shoes, which means getting kind of task by task as she would, going through her day, in that it's not as So a lot of it is kind of banal, routine, kind of drudgery, as you said. And then maybe every seventh or eighth thing is a little odd. But she's got kind of all these dots and she can't join the lines. Essentially, she can't join them together. So she doesn't know exactly what's going on behind that door. She's getting hints and bits and pieces of information, but everything's kind of coming at her too quickly in order for her to really kind of figure it out. So the kind of complexity of that situation I was interested in, which meant a day in the life made kind of an easier way, not easier, but a kind of a way to give clarity to what it's like to be in that position, essentially.
Yeah, and you have those. I love how you describe sort of not being able to join up the dots, because I think that's illustrated so well in the scene where she meets the HR rep and she tries to explain what is happening and her worries, and she can't articulate anything without implicating herself or kind of making these accusations that could get her in trouble. And yet it's so obvious as somebody in the audience watching exactly what's going on, exactly what's being kind of willfully obscured and who's being protected and who's being hung out to dry. Can you talk a little bit about that scene? Because it feels quite different to the sort of rest of the film, which has more of a kind of a different pace. And that scene really feels like the kind of the explosive incident in the kind of climax of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it is like it's a 12-page scene and the rest of the film has barely any dialogue. So the rest of the film is quite built up of short scenes, and this is very long. There was a few things I was trying to achieve with it. I mean, the first thing was I wanted to make it clear that sort of HR departments are there to protect the company instead of the employees. So that was kind of goal number one. And goal number two was I needed to have kind of an example of gaslighting in the film, because so many women spoke about being kind of gaslit by their workplaces or their HR departments into thinking things were okay, or kind of leaving that office being more confused than when they walked in, or kind of having doubts about their own reasons for being there and all of that. So that was kind of all built into that confrontation. And then it was Matthew McFadden plays the HR representative and he's so amazing. So the two of them, and Julia is incredible, the two of them together was just like brought so much more kind of depth and sort of texture to it. And there's something so creepy and insidious in the way he's very calm and rational when he's kind of delivering all those lines. There's nothing, he doesn't get angry necessarily, he doesn't like swear, but it's kind of somehow more evil than that, the kind of very kind of reasonable tone that he uses. So yeah, it was a really interesting kind of scene to play with.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about some of the women that you spoke to and the research process, because obviously your background is in documentary, and this is a fiction film, although I guess to me it feels more kind of like a non-fiction hybrid, because it feels so grounded in experiences that feel kind of so recognizably verite. But yeah, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the process of kind of finding these women and sort of the questions that you asked them and how you got them to trust you, with that information.
I mean, it's really tricky and really difficult, but I guess the most surprising thing when you start chatting to people is just how similar everyone's experiences are. Like there was so much repetition in what I was hearing, and the patterns, there were so many kind of patterns emerging, in that I'd hear the same stories again and again in London, in LA, in Melbourne, in New York. Like it was very strange how much that I was just how much of this, the kind of, I guess, how awful some people's days can be in terms of like this gender division of labor stuff was kind of what I was most interested in the beginning, which is like, what tasks are you given that the boys at the office aren't given? And things about getting the coffee, looking after the children, dealing with the wife, like all that stuff came like I was told again and again and again, to the point where it gets very upsetting, because you just think, well, how do we have any hope? And is it this bleak? But yeah, it was just a difficult process, and I just tried to make sure that I was kind of available to anyone when they want to speak to me. I tried to give everyone the script and to read and check over. And so it was a really, it's a long process, but yeah, it's, I don't know. It's just, it's sort of becomes something else, by the way, though, when you kind of script it off of these off of stories, and the stories kind of turn into, it's a very odd process, like kind of the hybridity of it, and that like it does, as soon as you put actors into those scenes, and they kind of come alive, they become something else entirely. So it is a strange kind of process, the whole thing.
How much did you kind of have on the page already before you sort of started talking to the women?
Nothing. I mean, I started with research with college students, and essentially some of their stories are in there too. So it is like a mix of like hundreds of women's stories, essentially, that kind of formed the base, like the backbone of a day, essentially.
Yeah, I think I'm still kind of obsessed with how duration is used in this film, and how it sort of really helps create empathy with that character, and with the sort of exhausting, draining nature of it. I think another thing that kind of draws that out is her sort of really sad and very relatable relationship with her parents, right? Who sort of call her up and thrilled for her, and understand that she's too busy to talk to them, and, you know, just trying to kind of congratulate her really on having this fancy job in a big city. And that scene at the end where she talks to her father on the phone, and he's just like, well, you know, I hope you're having fun. She's like, yes, you know, it's long hours. I just felt that was so sort of touching to include that, and to kind of, I guess, really make explicit the way women convince themselves and convince their loved ones that everything's fine when it so clearly isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you mean like why include, like what's the gist of the question? Sorry. I mean, I agree.
It wasn't a question exactly. It was more of a comment, which I guess is that you're not supposed to do in a Q&A. But yeah, I'm interested in the ways in which you sort of subtly tried to weave the emotional toll of what was happening to her when she's actually so cut off from a support network.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the women I spoke to felt quite isolated in those positions, and I think all of us, I definitely felt in my own experiences in the film festival circuit quite alone with things that I felt were objectionable. I didn't know who to trust with that, who to kind of speak up to about that kind of behavior. So, I mean, it does, and the kind of culture of silence at companies like that makes it really difficult for you to be able to kind of open up. And so I do think that was important. And the parents became kind of a way to kind of tether her to she becomes a little more human with those interactions, because there's not a heap of personal details, but those two parents kind of work in a way where you kind of get a sense of who she is a little, and it gives you a little bit of character to go off. So yeah, it was important for a number of reasons. But yeah, I think a lot of parents come up to me after that scene and say that they're worried about their kid now, and they can ask more questions. So yeah, it's been interesting.
I want to talk about your decision not to show the boss, because you kept him off screen. Why did you sort of feel that would create more impact?
I guess, I mean, originally from the beginning, I always said I want it to be like a women-centered story. I felt like we'd had given bad men enough screen time over the years, and it's about time we told stories about women and what's keeping women from positions of power. So that was kind of the goal. And I wasn't going to have him at all, not even his voice, but in the end, Garner's face is so amazing that the camera kind of I knew that we needed a close-up of a lot of those scenes. And then when the phone's right here and you can't hear what's coming out of it, it's weird. So we ended up recording kind of the boss's phone calls in post-production and added them in after the shoot, which it seemed to work. I think we got an actor who's incredible, who came in and terrified me, and so that was an interesting process. So yeah.
How did you cast him? Because he's got an absolutely terrifying, menacing voice.
I don't know, we worked with the casting agent who recommended him, and he's an incredible actor, so we all said yes. And then he walked on the day and was like, oh, I've met 1,000 of these guys, I know exactly who this is, and kind of just started kind of doing a bunch of different kind of riffing on things and playing around with the text, and it was really wonderful. We got some really great stuff out of it.
I wonder if it's okay to ask you how it felt to premiere this film on the festival circuit, because it's very interesting to me that this is a film about the film industry, and then you're showing it to rooms of people whose behavior is probably not that dissimilar to some of the people in the movie. Some of the patronizing, cruel, arrogant men that are kind of portrayed in the film. I'm pretty sure some of those men will have seen it. Can you talk a little bit about sort of taking it to festivals and the sort of response you've had from other people in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting process. I mean, it definitely makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and that, I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I think we do need to kind of all interrogate our behavior after this many years of having this many women hurt and sidelined by this system. So I think a little discomfort is good. But yeah, so I think there are going to be executives and people that work in the film industry who are a little bristled by it. But I think we've had a lot of people come up to me afterwards and say that they want to rethink the way they treat their assistants, and that they're going to think about some of their behavior, and perhaps when they were leaning over somebody's chair that they could see how in the film that would make someone feel uncomfortable. There was a few kind of moments of reflection, I think, from people that I've seen come out of the theater, which I think is great. So the more of that, the better.
And what about the assistants and the interns? Have you had any kind of response from them?
We had our Los Angeles premiere was an assistants only screening. So it was all, in LA, it was just all assistants, which is kind of amazing. But yeah, I think, I don't know, it's great. I mean, a lot of them feel very excited to have that story kind of, it's one of these things where, I don't know, I've had this experience where you get treated terribly and you try and tell your friends about it and they're going, oh, ignore it, it's just a bad day. And you're like, no, it really is shattering and it's really wounding. And the idea of showing it, actually depicting it, and just how awful it is, and how kind of it can really ruin somebody or kind of destroy their self-confidence and self-worth. I think having all that played out for people in 90 minutes is I think people are grateful to see that on the screen. I've had that reaction from a lot of people, at least, which is great. So yeah, it resonates with a lot of young people, which is great.
Well, I think it's sort of noteworthy that this character, she's gone to a good school, she's a graduate from Northwestern, she sort of seems fairly middle class, she's quite competent at her job, she is sort of young, she's attractive, although not his type. And she's kind of got everything going for her, and yet even operating from this place or where things should be going well, things should only be on the up for her, you just see the way her confidence and her self-worth is just slowly eroded, and it's heartbreaking. Tell me a little bit more about Julia and how you ended up going with her, because I got really excited when I first watched this film. It was one of the last like big screen experiences I had before the coronavirus, and I didn't know very much about the film. I knew that you'd made it, so I was interested, but I hadn't really looked up anything about it, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see Julia Garner, because I remember her from this film called Electric Children from several years ago, and yeah, I thought she was really talented in that. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about her and why she felt right for the role?
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen her in The Americans a while back, and I remember thinking immediately when I saw her on the screen that she was striking. She had an interesting look about her, and then I guess the casting agent, I said I needed somebody that was, I didn't really have anyone in my head. I didn't know who it was, but I knew, she was in her 20s and she's, young woman. That's basically the only kind of whatever descriptors. And then I said I would love her to be infinitely watchable. She's doing the most mundane tasks. It'd be great if she was interesting to watch. And there was a kind of a list of names and hers was on it. And I remember thinking, oh, she'd be good. And I met her for a coffee and she got the script and she really understood it and we got along really well right away. And so it kind of just worked and clicked. So, and it was an amazing process. We got to work, we did like a month of rehearsals and then we shot for 18 days, which is very short, but we managed to get it done. because we did a month of rehearsals and a lot of discussion and a lot of kind of figuring out emotionally where that character was at every given moment and mapping that out really. So yeah, it was a great process.
Yeah, I'm also really interested in, you described the kind of the nature or the observational nature of the film as kind of tracking all of the mundanity in a day. And yet every shot is very interesting, very meticulous, very composed. Can you talk to me a little bit about the sort of style of these very sort of often bird's eye view shots, like these very fixed frames, and yeah, how you kind of used that to sort of tell the story visually?
Yeah, I forgot about the bird's eye view shots. I haven't watched it for a while. I haven't thought about them. I know there are. I remember that being a big discussion point. But I mean, a lot of it, the framing was like on the set, like discussing whether we should do it or not, kind of a thing. Like whether it was too stylized or if it broke kind of the rules we'd set up. But I think it works. But yeah, a lot of the kind of blocking and the framing and the considerations there were I really wanted to kind of make it feel like the environment was sort of swallowing her up, like she was kind of getting, like it became more and more claustrophobic as you went. So she does get like lower and lower in the frame, and you'll kind of notice as she goes to HR, she does kind of, by the end, before she goes in, she's sort of, her head's right at the bottom and there's a lot of space at the top. And I felt like there was a lot of kind of orchestration of that, like the visual sort of language and what we were doing with that, and tonally trying to make it feel kind of tense and oppressive, but also very authentically officey, like fluorescent lights, not too dark because that would be strange. It's daytime in an office. So how do you create tension within like a fluorescent lit atmosphere? So yeah, it was an interesting kind of balance, but we ended up getting it right. We watched a lot of Fincher, like Zodiac and Mindhunter and things like that, because they have this really interesting light quality. And yeah, it was,
they're kind of drained, they're like sort of drained of light and sort of, yeah, fluorescent, and
yeah,
it's very creepy. When I watched this film, for me it really played as a thriller. Did you envision it as that yourself?
Not really, no. I mean, I still don't really see it as a thriller, but people say that a lot. People call it all sorts of things though, and I'm happy for people to see it kind of their way. I didn't sort of make it to be like, no. I'm kind of happy for people to give it a label. But yeah, it's interesting. It is, I mean, I definitely wanted it to be tense, but I wasn't trying to, there's a difference where there's like a horror-y thing. I didn't want, sorry, I'm like, it's getting late at night in Australia and I'm tired, but I didn't want it to play like you were going to rip, like someone, she was going to be ripped out of the scene any moment and attacked. Like I didn't want it to feel like suspenseful in a way where you were waiting for her to be attacked in that sense. So it was a really difficult balance to walk, where how can we create tension without her feeling under threat at any given moment? And yeah, kind of that was kind of a challenge that we tried to play with.
I feel I have an idea of why you might not have wanted any of those kind of moments of tension to explode into moments of violence, but maybe you can talk a little bit, go into this full horror, full thriller.
I lost you then.
Sorry. I was just saying that, you said it is important to you for it to not turn into a kind of full-on horror or thriller. And I was saying that I feel like maybe that's because so often in those genres, those explosions of violence are so gendered, right? We see women being raped or being murdered, or awful things happening to them. And what I like about this film is that it doesn't go there, and it doesn't need to go there to kind of still give you the feeling of rageful injustice. Was that kind of why you didn't want to sort of make it into a sort of straight thriller?
Definitely. I feel like these stories have been kind of sensationalized for years, and it's about time we kind of strip that away and told it kind of authentically and delicately and sensitively, that in a way that examines not just this kind of more kind of lurid subject matter, but that examines kind of a larger system and structure and culture that's kind of keep holding up essentially these predators, and kind of how can we dismantle, not just get rid of the bad men, but dismantle kind of the machinery around someone like that. So yeah, for sure.
I think kind of probably something that you're being asked a lot in kind of talking about the film now it's out in the world is how do we sort of ensure those power structures aren't constantly recreated? I mean, I'm sure that you don't have a kind of straight solution for that, but I'm wondering if sort of the pause that's been, the enforced pause that's been put on the film industry has like made you think differently about the structures of power that prop it up.
I mean, yeah, not really. I mean, the pause, I'm not sure how much it helps. I feel like we're so rattled and this is so chaotic right now that it's tough to know what will you know, how this will affect everything. But I do think what was happening before we paused was we were starting to have at least more conversations about it, and more conversations about getting more women into film, more women into positions of power in the film industry and all industries. And the more kind of conversations like that, the better. And I think that is what, I mean, change is kind of created out of kind of awareness and out of those conversations. So yeah, the more you and I can talk about it, the better, essentially.
Brilliant. Well, the film, if you haven't already seen it, is available to rent or to buy. And the BFI is accepting donations at the moment. You can figure out how to help the BFI during this time in the box below. And yeah, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for chatting with me, Kitty. And yeah, I hope that everybody gets a chance to watch this film.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.